Howdy. Uh,
Howdy.
can you hear me properly? Just
I
making
can,
sure.
yes.
Okay. Hi. It's really nice to meet you. Thank you so much for joining me. So my name is Anna. I'm a student worker at the LGBTQ Pride Center. And go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure, yes, everyone. And thank you, Anna, for having me. My name is Dr. Denise Krisafi, and I am a health promotion coordinator here in the offices of the Dean of Student Life. My primary focus is on interpersonal violence prevention, but I do work as well with other areas that we focus on, including alcohol and other drug prevention and our general wellness initiatives.
Yeah, okay. So today we'll be talking a little bit about resources, and since it is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, I am here with Denise, and we're just going to be talking about a few topics regarding sexual violence. So what that leads me to my first question, and that is basically, what is sexual violence?
Mhm. So, sexual violence can really be thought of as an all encompassing umbrella term for many different types of what we can consider sexual abuse, sexual assault, rape, sexual exploitation that can happen over the life course. It's really important to know that sexual violence is a type of power based personal violence, or sometimes we refer to that, especially here at our institution, as interpersonal violence. Those are interchangeable terms, regardless of where you hear that and how. But sexual violence is one type of power-based personal violence that can happen to someone. Oftentimes, it also happens in connection with other forms of power-based personal violence. So it can happen as a form of, in connection with stalking, in connection with dating or domestic violence, in connection with sexual harassment, or if we think about intersectionality as well, it can happen as a part of somebody being targeted because of certain parts of their identity as well. And that could be it could be their race, their ethnicity, their religion, their nationality, their gender expression, or gender identity, their sexual orientation, etc. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And going off of that, what are the different types of sexual violence that one might experience?
Yeah, so sexual violence, unfortunately, can happen across the entire life course. So we know that we can see this from infancy until older age. And so oftentimes when we think about the life course, what can happen is that we see this happen in the earliest stages of life as a form of child abuse and neglect. And when we think about incest, when we think about child sexual abuse within the family, those are kind of the earliest stages that we can see. But it can also be a form of sexual assault, and I'll go into that a little bit more in a minute. But when we think about sexual violence, we oftentimes interchangeably use the term sexual assault, and that's okay. But sexual assault has different types underneath it. So if we think of sexual violence as the umbrella term, and then everything that can happen underneath that, but it can also be something that happens as a part of bullying, teen dating violence, hazing. When we think about getting into adulthood, especially for our college students, hazing is something that I think is all too familiar. It can also happen as a part of our, unfortunately, workplace relationships and our professional relationships as well. Thinking about domestic violence and dating violence. Sometimes we call that intimate partner violence or relationship violence, depending on how we want to term it. And then also even in older age, when we think about elder abuse, which is our folks who are age 60 plus, and how that happens as a form of exploitation. But when we think about the types as well, certain things that you all might hear, I mentioned child abuse and incest, but sexual exploitation might be another thing that another term about, and that is taking sexual advantage of someone for personal gain. That can also a lot of times include things like revenge pornography or sharing explicit photos without somebody's consent. Um, but those are different types. But I do want to go back to sexual assault for a minute because here at Texas A&M, when we look at our system rules in terms of Title IX, which prevents all forms of sexual assault and sexual harassment, we do look at sexual assault as something that individuals obviously experience and can be held accountable for at the university. And so when we think about sexual assault, what that includes is rape. So that's going to be the non-consensual penetration of someone by any means. It also includes fondling, which is non-consensual touching over or under the clothing in what we consider more private areas. So thinking about our breast, our groin, our buttocks, And then also too, it includes that incest, child abuse frame to it as well, although we don't see that very often at Texas A&M just by nature of our population. But sexual exploitation is also included in there. And I think it's really important for our students to know that our student rules actually prohibit not what we call non-consensual sexual contact, which maybe isn't under the definition of fondling. So maybe it's not considered a quote unquote private area, but someone is still touching another person without their consent in another area of their body that's causing distress, emotional distress, harm, inability to focus on their education or their work or their personal lives because it's happening repeatedly.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's really important to note that there are different types. And um, that leads me to my next question. Since there are different types, what are some common effects that a person might experience regarding sexual violence?
Yeah, so sexual violence is always about power and control. So when I go back to what I said before about this being a form of power-based personal violence, that's the root of where that term comes from. So when we think about sexual violence or any type of interpersonal violence, so physical, when we think about emotional or psychological abuse, when we think about stalking, even financial abuse or taking away resources from somebody to isolate them. Um, those are all forms of power-based personal violence, which is rooted in that power and control wheel. So a lot of times when individuals experience this, whether short or long term, they're going to have trauma impacts because it is a traumatic experience. Something is taken away from them. It could be their independence, it could be their resources, it could be their social networks. So oftentimes what we see in terms of response is that there'll be either one or both types of trauma that affect their kind of social wellness or affects their physiology. So I'll start with the social aspects first. So it might be that they stop going to class, right? They stop going to work. They don't want to go out with their friends anymore, right? They don't want to leave the house or their residence because they're worried about what's going to happen if they step outside. So those would be a couple of examples of kind of social isolation, not wanting to talk to anyone or engage in activities that they once enjoyed, not even their hobbies. It could also be that maybe somebody really liked to kind of like hug their friends before, right? And now they don't want to do that. They don't want to be touched at all, not even in like a socially friendly, embracing sort of way. Then we think about the physiological effects. These can start off as things like inability to sleep. Or it can be sleeping too much. It can be not eating at all or eating too much. So thinking about coping behaviors to kind of either find comfort or not engage in those activities because they literally we're afraid to sleep or we just don't have an appetite anymore, right, from experiencing that trauma. But it can also manifest into post-traumatic stress disorder. So it can be increased startle response, high anxiety. Um, it can also be depression, like self-deprecating statements, things like I don't matter anymore, or my experiences don't matter to people. My opinion doesn't matter anyway. Those types of statements that are very minimizing to self. And then also leading up to the most severe, which would be severe depression, suicide ideation, suicide attempting, negative coping behavior, so using alcohol or substances to cope. And so we're seeing those changes in somebody where they're isolating, but they might be dropping a lot of weight, right? Or they might be gaining a lot of weight. They might be out there taking risks, or they might be at the complete opposite end of that particular spectrum where they are completely isolated and afraid to go outside. So it's usually one extreme or the other, not somewhere in the middle, that we see those impacts of trauma come about.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's really important to note as well because, our students, um, have a lot of resources on campus and some might not know. And so I do want to touch up and discuss some resources that might be available for students who are experiencing these types of effects or
Yeah. Yeah, so there are two types of resources, and I'm going to start with confidential. So, confidential resources are going to be places where a student could go on our campus or in the community and disclose any type of sexual violence. and not be forced into giving a report to the university or giving a report to the police unless they wanted to. That could be a conscious choice that they make. There are only limited exceptions to when one of those service providers would need to report, and that would be it would be self-disclosed harm to self or others. It would be if active child abuse or elder abuse was going on. So those would be the only times that they would have to break that confidentiality by law. But otherwise, those narratives, those experiences, those stories are safe with the person who is listening. And so oftentimes, those are going to be our medical providers. So our mental health providers and our physical health providers, and also our local counselors at our like rape crisis centers or emergency shelters in town. So here on campus, that would be Student Health Services or BUTL. And it would also be our counseling and psychological services. So those would be confidential resources that we have right here on campus that any of our students could talk to without a forced report to Title IX or to UPD. Out in the community, for sexual violence in particular, our primary resource is going to be the Sexual Assault Resource Center of Brazos Valley. They have trauma-informed counselors who work at that center. They also have a 24/7 really crisis line that anyone could call if they're seeking support for someone else or just need to talk to someone. And then also to our Twin City Mission Domestic Violence Services works very closely with the Sexual Assault Resource Center of Brazos Valley. They tend to respond a little bit more to emergency living situations where there's active relationship violence going on. And somebody needs to seek emergency shelter for that. But it might be a combination of physical and sexual violence. So the Sexual Assault Resource Center may work with them to counsel the individual. And then also recently we connected with Unbound Bryan College Station, which is an anti-human trafficking organization. They also actively respond to instances of sexual violence as well in our community, whether or not it has to do with human trafficking. But that is their charge. So they all work together, great resources to consider. If someone doesn't want to go on campus or is maybe looking for a little bit more privacy by going off campus as well.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to add regarding the research? Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then I wanted folks to know who are watching that there are non-confidential resources. And so non-confidential resources are going to be really anywhere else on campus, not operating within those hats. Essentially, I wish our office was confidential, but it's not. We can help guide students towards resources, but if we were to find out about an instance of sexual violence, we would be mandated to report that to our Title IX office. So on campus, when we think about formalized services, that's going to be mostly UPD and also our Title IX or our Civil Rights and Equity Investigations offices. Now, I think what's important for students to understand is even if a report goes through, it doesn't mean that an investigation happens, that they have to participate in. So I think that's just really important to know that there's still some choice, even if there's a mandated report. But I am obviously, as someone in this field, I am very cautious about someone who's experienced sexual violence and the trauma that comes with that and having choice in what they want to do. So I usually, if I can, will encourage a confidential resource first to get sort of that overview of all of the options. So that individual who's impacted can then make choices based upon what they need. So there is a difference. I think it's so important for our students to know that there's a difference in those reporting obligations and who they can talk to that will respect that confidentiality, and then times when that confidentiality won't be there, but the privacy will still be maintained, obviously. So just important things to know about resources here. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, no, that I feel like is really important. I feel like for students, especially because this can be like a sensitive time. And so, yeah, thank you for adding that. So lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about like how we can support survivors when they come to us for help or anything that we can say to guide them.
Yeah, absolutely. I usually break this down into 4 steps, especially for students who have never received any trauma-informed care training before. Maybe they've never had a conversation about it, or they haven't gone through, for instance, we do offer our stand-up trauma-informed care program here through Health Promotion, but not every student on our campus is going to go through that because we're a large campus. So I usually like to break it down into 4 steps. The first is, and this is the easiest thing that anyone can do, if someone is disclosing an instance of sexual violence, no matter what type of sexual violence it is, the best thing that we can do for that individual is just take a step back and listen, not question their experience, not impart these sort of what ifs on them, because what that can do is start to cloud their memory, right? And their memory is already in a traumatic situation. That memory is already disrupted in a lot of ways. And sometimes it takes a little bit for details to come back if they do at all, because we were in a trauma, that person was in a trauma response. They weren't in a low stress situation where they were able to catalog information. So the best thing we can do is just take a step back and listen to how much they want to tell us. Maybe ask some open-ended questions and see how comfortable they are with sharing a little bit more information. The second step would be to respect their independence. It is not on us to make choices for that individual on what they should be doing, right? We can suggest resources to them and give them information and ask them maybe how they want to connect if they do at all. But a lot of times when we care about somebody, our charge to them is to fix it or make it better. Or if I just tell them what they should be doing, then we can get through this faster and the trauma will just go away. That doesn't happen. Just because we want it to. So a lot of times it's about making sure that we respect sometimes their decision to maybe not reach out at a certain point in time. They would have reasons why they might not want to. And a lot of those might have to do with safety. And a lot of that might also do with just having time for them to process what happened and the choices that they want to make at certain times. And then the third step would be make sure that they are safe. Obviously, if they are in an incredibly unsafe situation where the threat is immediate and ongoing, I would encourage at that point involving authorities in it if they're comfortable. But obviously, if there is someone who's harming someone else and they're outside with a weapon or they're threatening them, like when you come back home, I'm going to do further harm to you, want to get that person to safety. And that might be through a call to the police, or it might be, if that's uncomfortable for the person impacted, it might be then reaching out to the Sexual Assault Resource Center or Twin City Mission Domestic Violence Services or Unbound to connect with an advocate who can safety plan with that person. And then the fourth would be steward them to resources. So know about your resources, know where to find them. I can give you all a really good link if you go to tx.ag/healthy relationships. That's actually for our first year course here at Texas A&M for our healthy relationships lesson. And there is a complete list of confidential and non-confidential resources in Bryan College Station, both on and off campus, with a list of what they provide, their email, their phone number, their address if we can provide it, and their operating hours. So really good place to find those resources out. I also do want to add as well that inclusivity of resources is really important, and also cultural relevance is really important. And I can't say enough about all of our resources I mentioned do this, but I think what's really important to understand is that I get questions a lot about, well, is this a women's issue? And I'm going to put women, like, isn't response, is mostly geared towards women. And traditionally that has been true. But particularly over the last 10 years, even our local resources have opened up opportunities for whether we want to call them survivors, victims, individuals who've been impacted in some way by sexual violence. All of those services reach individuals regardless of their identities. And cultural relevance has been something, particularly in the last few years, that has been really important to our local resources here in Bryan College Station to make sure that we are providing options and having conversations with individuals that meet them where they are in terms of their trust, in terms of past experiences that they might have had with service providers, in terms of being able to understand laws and policies. So those are there. Obviously, and that intersectionality piece is important. So understanding somebody's comfort level as it pertains to their identity. But all services that are provided in terms of counseling, in terms of medical triage, including forensic exams or what are commonly known as rape kits, are open to individuals of all identities. Even Twin City Mission Domestic Violence Services, their shelters now are not just for women or what we would consider cis women. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing all of those resources and just being here to talk about like these topics because I feel like they're very important. Regardless if it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month, it's just very important information to know. But is there anything you would like to add or anything that you would like to tell like our students?
Yeah, absolutely. I know particularly in recent days, so I'm going to get really current with it. We have seen some things on national headlines that have been absolutely terrifying related to sexual violence. And I do want our students to know on this campus that we are committed to this prevention 24/7. This is not something, April is nationally recognized as Sexual Assault Awareness Month through the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. And it's a great way to bring awareness to this issue at a particular time of year and join together is really allies and individuals who want to learn more across the country to engage in education and prevention. But we do this work all the time, and health promotion is a major, I would say, one of the primary office on campus that does that prevention work. But we also have some amazing student organizations on our campus who are also participating in this, faculty and staff from across our campus who serve as facilitators, and we have such wonderful working relationships with the off-campus resources that I mentioned before, who also provide education to our campus actively. So regardless of how anybody watching this wants to engage, there are a lot of different options for direct or indirect involvement. But if you're wanting to learn more, please reach out to us here at Health Promotion if you just are looking for additional resources or ways to learn.
Okay, well, yeah, thank you so much for being here today. This is the end of my interview and my questions, but yeah, I hope you have a really good day. Thank you so much, and I will add everything, like the handle, Instagram handle for health promotion below. And yeah, okay, well, thank you so much, and have a good weekend.
You too. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.